So in the interest of time, we will go ahead and start. Welcome to Workshop A, Reducing Inequality, Alleviating Poverty. The workshop explores economic disparities and poverty that is induced by factors other than merit, disparities that are really that lead to psychological feelings of disconnectedness, sense of injustice, social integration, disintegration. And in this workshop, we have a panel of distinguished speakers who will share with us their reflections on de-skilling and upskilling, models of workforce development, and the harmful practices or policies that sometimes lead to exclusions or set people up on a path of alienation and disenfranchisement. So that is really sometimes it's a life path where they're not able to leverage their full potential or employ their talents or have a fair chance of achieving the American dream. So briefly, I'll introduce our speakers, and please engage with us in the Q&A or the chat box if you would like to direct any questions to the speakers. The speakers are Dr. Ray Koslowski, professor at Albany, my colleague, on reducing brain waste among refugees in New York State. And then we have Margaret Shrager and Joanne Williman. I'm sorry. Let me see. Winningham. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Winningham from Maryland, and they're discussing the Maryland Skilled Immigrant Task Force, supporting internationally trained professional workforce integration. And then we have Mustafa Rifat, who is going to speak about strengthening employment and healthcare inclusion for refugees with disabilities. We also have Dr. Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar, who will talk about how institutions, educational, familial, religious, and governmental intersect to shape racial and ethnic stratification in higher education, science, and the labor market. Looking forward to your presentations. Each of our presenters will share their reflections, and then we'll open it up to all of you for in-depth discussions. So should we start with Professor Koslowski?
Okay, thank you very much, Dina. I'd just like to, can you see my presentation? Is it sharing?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share a bit of work I'm doing on a paper here, a working paper in progress, and I think this might be its maiden voyage out into the world here. So appreciate any comments that you might have. So when people's education, skills, and experience are not put to work, the unused human capital it's an economic loss to us all. Lost productivity, lost income that could have been spent in local businesses, lost tax revenue. Now, physicians, engineers, computer programmers, and teachers enter the United States legally every year through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. They are resettled in New York and become eligible for permanent resident status after 1 year. Now, many of these refugees come with college degrees and professional experience, like almost half of recently arrived immigrants to the U.S. But as Zhana Batalova and Michael Fix explain in a 2021 report, 21% of college-educated immigrants work in jobs that don't require a college degree or they are unemployed. Reducing such brain waste among refugee professionals can increase labor productivity and economic growth. Now, this is particularly the case in upstate New York, where the overwhelming majority of New York's refugees are resettled. So in today's presentation, I will first demonstrate that refugee resettlement is driving upstate urban population growth. Then I'll explain how underemployment of high-skilled refugees represents a missed opportunity for economic development in New York State. Then I'll review New York State responses to underemployment among refugees, and finally offer a few policy options to reduce brain waste among refugees. Now, the resettlement of refugees, arrival of special immigrant visa holders from Afghanistan and Iraq, and humanitarian parole of Afghan and Ukrainian refugees has been driving upstate urban population growth for the last 15 years. Over the past 2 decades, New York State has been among the top 5 destination states for refugees resettled through the United States Refugee Admission Program. And about 90% of the refugees resettled in New York State were resettled in the 5 upstate New York counties. Now, as the overall population of New York's 52 upstate counties decreased by over 5,000 people between the 2010 and the 2020 census, a total of 31,866 refugees were resettled in major cities of 5 upstate counties: Buffalo in Erie County, Syracuse and Onondaga County, Rochester and Monroe County, Albany in Albany County, and Utica in Oneida County. Now, during that decade, the populations of all 5 of these top refugee-receiving cities increased by 25,668 residents in total. So if the refugees resettled in Albany, Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica and Buffalo remained in those cities during the decade between 2010 and 2020, then resettled refugees accounted for all of the population growth of Albany, Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica, and most of the population growth of Buffalo. I mean, even if half of the refugees resettled in Albany, Rochester, and Syracuse moved out to the suburbs, say, or elsewhere during that decade, refugee resettlement would still be responsible for all of those cities' population growth. So the underemployment of high-skilled refugees, this just represents a missed opportunity for economic development in New York State. So a 2016 Migration Policy Institute report on brain waste in New York explains that there were 878,000 recent immigrants and refugees in New York State with at least a bachelor's degree, of which 234,000, or 27%, were working in jobs that didn't require a college degree, or they were unemployed. The report estimated that this brain waste reduced total annual earnings by approximately $5 billion, with a corresponding loss of almost $600 million in unrealized New York State and local tax revenue. Now, many refugees have professional experience and skills that are in demand in New York State labor markets, but they lack advanced English language proficiency, recognizable professional credentials, U.S. occupational specific knowledge, and networks that are necessary to secure professional positions comparable to the positions that they once held in their home countries. For example, in Albany, there are 5 medical doctors and 1 doctor of pharmacy who have had great difficulty securing any job in the medical field. Right? So refugees with college degrees often read, write, and speak English quite well, but they lack sufficient professional English with the specialized English vocabulary of their fields. Now, the federal government provided refugee resettlements with 90 days worth of financial support to get established, and that was abruptly terminated on January 27th. But in that situation, instead of taking advanced professional English courses soon after arrival and preparing to seek professional jobs in their fields, So many of these refugees must take full-time, low-skill, low-wage jobs to pay the bills. And then when these high-skilled refugees fail to secure jobs that utilize their skills and professional experience, it is a missed opportunity. For refugees, it means earning less and being less productive than they could have become, rather than letting their skills atrophy. For New York State, it means a significant share of growing upstate urban populations remain unnecessarily underemployed. So, what is New York State doing about it? Well, parts of New York State government dedicated to helping refugees have responded to the problem of brain waste with specific programs and funding. Now, the same cannot be said of New York's employers and economic development organizations. So, the Bureau of Refugee Services contracts with nonprofit organizations to provide employment preparation and support services. The Office for New Americans gives grants to nonprofit refugee and immigrant serving organizations to provide free services from English as a second language courses to immigration legal consultations. In 2021, ONA launched the Professional Pathways for High-Skilled Immigrants program, which provides funding for job coaching and career training resources in Albany, Buffalo, Syracuse, Utica, New York City, and Hempstead on Long Island. In contrast, responses to refugee brain waste from employers and state economic development agencies have been minimal. After noting upstate population decline and inflows of resettled refugees, Ken Koslowski, the vice president of the Business Council of New York State, pointed out the promise that refugees offer to upstate workforce development. But Koslowski points out that, quote, there are no New York State economic development or job creation incentives aimed specifically at encouraging employers to hire refugees. He then notes that incentive programs can be used to support refugee training and employment efforts. For example, Governor Hochul expanded the 2019 Workforce Development Initiative with its $175 million for job training projects into a $350 million investment in workforce development. However, a keyword search for refugee in the Workforce Development Initiative projects database listing 10,937 projects available produced only 2 awards for projects totaling $176,875. Now, mind you, these are with anticipated completion dates in 2019 and 2020. I mean, this amount is 0.5% of the $350 million for job training projects. I mean, this is a very small percentage of job training funding devoted to help the people responsible for all of Albany, Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica's population growth over the past 15 years. Look, as I see this situation, I'm thinking that New York State, counties, local policymakers could take several steps to reduce brain waste among high-skilled refugees. First, simply expand the Office for New Americans Professional Pathways program with funding for more job coaches. Second, help refugee-serving organizations apply for the existing New York State Workforce Development Initiative grants. They're so busy, and if you think about all of the funding they've lost and the personnel they've lost, a little help might go a long way. Also, simply consider dedicating a separate pool of that workforce development funding to assist refugees to get jobs that match their skills. And finally, provide funding to SUNY and CUNY ESL programs so that they could offer courses such as English for professionals, English for medical professionals, and English for engineers. Well, thanks very much for your attention. I look forward to hearing the other presentations.
Great, thank you so much. Let's move on to Margaret and Joanna. Maryland Skilled Professional Training.
Great, thank you so much. Let me get our slides up. If you can hear me, hopefully,
Yes, we
yes.
can hear
Come
you.
back to the
Yeah.
Zoom.
Yeah.
And Margaret is going to lead us off. Share. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
All right. And now let's, why am I losing? Oh, here it is. All right, Margaret.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Margaret. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Adult Education at Prince George's Community College in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., where we have about 2,500 immigrants who are learning English and learning workforce preparation skills. And I also serve on the Maryland Skilled Immigrant Task Force, which has really been helpful in my position, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we support internationally trained professionals in workforce integration in the state of Maryland. And we're going to go ahead and move forward if we can. All right. There is a quick disclaimer. The content or opinions expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect or present the views, positions, or policies of the Maryland Department of Labor, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply an official endorsement by the Maryland Department of Labor. And I promise that's as fast as I'll talk the whole presentation. All right. Okay. So that's me. And then alongside me is also going to be Joanna. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having us, everyone. Joanna Winningham. I do work with the Maryland Department of Labor within the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning. We're essentially the federal pass-through for funding that comes for workforce development. If anyone's familiar with the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, we are the state pass-through for that. And then we kind of parse that out through the local areas in Maryland. Every county in Maryland has at least one workforce board that does provide workforce supports for job seekers as well as employers. And so my role really seeks to support the frontline staff that is working within our American Job Centers and our adult ed providers, as Margaret mentioned, that are providing basic adult education and English language learning. So supporting staff that's working on the front lines when it comes to working with our internationally born populations. Questions, comments, concerns, technical assistance. And I also serve as co-lead of Maryland Skilled Immigrant Task Force. So thank you for having us.
All right, so let's talk about what we mean by internationally trained professional, because everyone uses these terms a little bit differently. We're going to go ahead and define ours. So broadly speaking, an internationally born person who has work experience, training, or higher education from their home country. But specifically speaking, according to the Maryland Skilled Immigrant Task Force, an internationally trained professional is a work authorized, internationally born, and internationally trained worker with at least 2 years of formal or informal education, training, or on-the-job experience that has led to specific skills, training, knowledge, and/or abilities for certain types of work. So very much like what Dr. Koslowski was talking about in his presentation, these folks who are coming in and they have a great deal of experience and knowledge and skills that they can bring into the workforce, those are the folks that we are trying to help with this task force. All right. So what we do, the work that we do on a day-to-day basis is we collaborate across organizations. So I mentioned that I work for a community college where we have a large group of immigrants that we serve to help them get workforce ready in the United States. There's a whole lot more than just me. Our task force is actually quite large. We collaborate to advance workforce systems and accessibility and career opportunities for internationally trained individuals in Maryland. Some examples, there's a lot more than this, but we have the Maryland Department of Labor and Department of Human Services, adult education providers like me, resettlement agencies, immigrant serving nonprofits, American Job Centers, and more.
And so just a little bit about, the goals that we have for our task force. We're kind of running with three main goals for the past few years now. One is really increasing the visibility in the partnerships. And so how do we, one, increase the visibility about this population that far too often is overlooked, right? Folks just don't think about our internationally trained professionals. And then two, how do we increase partnerships between the organizations that are connected within the task force and outsourced organizations as well, right? Because there's a vast ecosystem of service providers and resources that one of the barriers that we know folks is that they just don't know what they don't know, right? And how do we get more folks to know about all the resources that exist? So trying to increase those partnerships between our member organizations as well. We try to create resource documents and to reduce barriers, right? So we've created different, lots of resource guides, career pathway guides. We try to host job fairs, information sessions, specifically targeting our internationally trained professionals, again, just to get them more in the know about what all is available, and then also increase the opportunities that they have access to because they're more targeted towards our internationally trained professionals. And then business engagement, right? We try to engage with our business community. Love to hear the work coming out of Canada and trying to engage the business community because again, we can have our workforce ready to go, but if we don't have the employers who are willing to take these folks on, we still have the workforce that is ready to go. So how do we continue to engage with businesses to really educate them about this population? Don't forget, when you're building your applicant tracking systems, don't just have a drop-down menu of U.S. institutions. You have to allow for folks to put that they went to school outside of the United States, right? So just being mindful of those little things that, again, far too often our internationally trained professionals are overlooked. How do we function as a task force? Every member is a volunteer other than myself and my co-lead that works with the Maryland Department of Human Services. Our roles encompass doing this kind of work, but everyone else is a volunteer, just like Margaret is. And so we come together monthly. We hold monthly meetings, primarily virtually. We do some in-person networking meetings as well, really to learn about what all exists in Maryland. And again, because you don't know what you don't know. So how do I get more in the know? So I have more, I always say, tools in my toolbox when it comes to working with our internationally trained professionals. When we want to complete a task, we form work groups. So the different resources that we've created, work groups have come together in order to complete those, hosting job fairs, engaging with our businesses as well. We have small work groups that come together in order to complete those tasks. And then again, we're just a like-minded network. I always say we're all rowing down the same river. We have different boats, different paddles. We provide different services. We have access to different information, but we have that same mission in mind. How can we support our internationally trained professionals in gaining skill-aligned employment? Some of our current work groups are just some of the current work that we're working on. We have a roadshow presentation. So this is one of our current work groups. We set out to really highlight the work of the task force for a couple of different goals. One, to just really let folks know, hey, we exist, we're here as a resource. And then two, also to see if we can recruit other members who would want to join us and join the work that we are doing as well. I did mention as far as how we operate, there's no dues, there's no requirements. We're very come as you can, participate as you're able to. Another work group that we have is we're working on an entrepreneurship guide for new Americans. So how do I start a business in Maryland, right? What are the different resources that I can tap into when it comes to trying to get my idea off the ground? And so trying to consolidate that into one nice guide. There's a lot of great information, a lot of great resources, but it's kind of all over the place. And so we're trying to kind of synthesize that into a nice tidy guide that really is question-based. We know the questions usually never change, but the resources may change. And so trying to develop that and hopefully have that by the end of this year. And then our business engagement work group, as I mentioned, we are setting out to connect with our workforce boards because they are comprised of at least 50% employers. And so how do we, again, educate them about our internationally trained professionals? What are some best hiring practices, some best inclusion practices, and how do we connect our business community with our task force members that are engaged in employment services for the population that they're working with? So how do we, get those linked together? We do have a New Americans page, and we can share these slides afterwards as well if anyone would like them. This will link directly to a page of different sections of information with resources, guides, just access to various things that are specific to our internationally born folks. And then the task force itself, we do a weekly newsletter that we should use to share information among our members, just what's happening in the news in Maryland nationally, and then upcoming events as well nationally, specifically in Maryland, job fairs, webinars, info sessions, anything that could be of help to our individuals who are working with our internationally trained professionals. Again, just having more tools in our toolbox.
All right, so we're going to talk about a little bit of member testimonials. I can actually start with my own. One of the things that can happen, I think, in all of our fields is that you tend to get siloed, right? So in adult education, I am not necessarily going out and working directly with folks who are working with health advocacy, for example. Due to the Skilled Immigrant Task Force, Now I am in monthly meetings with folks who are in that sector, right? So when I have a student come to me and say, hey, I'm facing this particular health crisis, now I have a contact who I have a well-established relationship with who I can send that student to. That alone, I think, is one of the core things that's important to the task force, is just developing a network of folks where we know how to work together to serve the various needs that our clients have. And I think the other piece that's really helpful is the education part. There's a lot of stuff that, in my preparation to work in education, I didn't get a law degree. So, I may not know everything that there is to know about immigration law or how it's impacting the workforce in Maryland. So the Skilled Immigrant Task Force has folks who are very knowledgeable in that field. When the new administration came in, a lot of our students had understandable concerns. So we were able to connect with folks in the Skilled Immigrant Task Force who could do Know Your Rights trainings that we were not qualified to do, but they were. So just having these connections is hugely valuable. Having the educational opportunities where we're learning new things about the landscape in Maryland and nationally every month. And then having that newsletter go out where it's just like, okay, when that newsletter comes out, I immediately open up a new email where I'm starting to send out all of the resources that are there. Like, hey, there's a job fair happening in this location. Hey, if any of our students are looking for a job in engineering, for example, this particular job was shared through the network, right? So it's just really opening a lot of doors to our students and to our clients statewide. And then we have a couple more testimonials on this slide. This one comes from the Howard County Library System. The Maryland Skilled Immigrant Task Force benefits my work by expanding my knowledge of extant organizational systems. I have a clearer picture of what resources are available to new Americans. The Skilled Immigrant Task Force also provides an opportunity to meet and learn from people in various organizations, so it is also a personally enriching group. And then another one from the Office of Baltimore County Executive. The Maryland Skilled Immigrant Task Force expands my network, gives me enormous resources, and makes me realize what I can do to help others. So really a lot of the benefit just comes from the fact that we talk to each other and we're breaking down those silos. In Maryland, along with, I know, a lot of other states, there's a lot of people who are working to try and help. Like it's easy to focus on the mountain that we're all trying to climb and we're all trying to push this boulder up, but there's a lot of us. We just need to work together.
Thank you. And then just, to wrap up our presentation, really, how does, the Skilled Immigrant Task Force support our members? Essentially, we kind of develop resources, right? We talk to our members and say, what can help you when you're working with our internationally trained folks? And so we've developed resources to help with that. We can answer questions, right? As Margaret said, hey, I'm having concerns from my students, but I don't have the answer. But hey, I'm going to go to my task force members and see who has information in order for me to share back with my students or my clients. Referrals, as Margaret also mentioned, being able to do a warm referral, not just, hey, go to this place, they're going to help you out. We know that that's not always effective, right? But if I can do a soft handoff from me to someone else, that's going to be way more effective for the person that we're looking to serve. And then again, to continue to establish the partnerships and collaborations we know are key when we're serving our internationally trained professionals, knowing that we can't do it alone. Again, we're also rowing down the same river, different boats, different paddles. And so how do we navigate that and continue to connect with our service providers that are in our own neighborhood that sometimes we don't even know about? And so I'll leave this QR code here for a second or two. That does conclude our session, our presentation here. So if you'd like to get the slides or learn about our newsletter or just learn more about the task force, that'll take you to a quick Google form. We just ask for your name and your email, and we'll get back to you with whatever information that you request by the end of the week.
Margaret and Joanna, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful model.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Last but of course not least, Dr. Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar. Dr. Salazar, please go ahead.
So I'm going to stop the share, but if we need to pull it back up at the end, I will, just for anyone who's still grabbing the QR code.
Thank you, Joanna.
Well, I'm going to, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to shift our focus to immigrant origin students in our K through 12 systems. So for many immigrant origin students, the road to college and career success begins long before they fill out a college application. And it starts with what courses they're able to take in school, and more specifically in high school. So I'm Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Pennsylvania State University, and it's wonderful to be here at this important conference. So I'm going to highlight how access to college level coursework in high school shapes the college outcomes for English learners and what this means for integration and equity in skilling efforts for our immigrant and especially our immigrant students. So the brief findings that I'm going to address in my time are from a study that I conducted alongside my colleague Brian Holzman and others on the college enrollment and completion outcomes of English learners in Houston. And this study comes from a research practice partnership between Rice University in Houston and the Houston Independent School District, which is the 8th largest school district in the nation. So why does this matter? Why focus on immigrant origin students? So today, more than 5 million or 10 million students, or 10%, excuse me, of students in our US public schools are classified as English learners or ELs. And these are students whose home language is not English, and they're not deemed proficient in reading, writing, listening, or speaking in English. And we have ample evidence that course placement in high school shapes long-term college outcomes. And why does this matter? Because graduating from college allows immigrant students to engage in the labor market. And we know also from ample evidence that having a college degree results in larger earnings in the labor market over time compared to a high school diploma. So ELs have lower rates of college enrollment and completion compared to students that are not classified as English learners. And this English learner designation is really meant to provide students with the language supports that they need to engage in the classroom, but it can also serve to track ELs into lower academic tracks by one, crowding out academic content for these language acquisition courses, or two, functioning as a label that signals to school staff, whether accurately or not, that they are not prepared for more rigorous courses. So I'm going to quickly jump into our findings. And the first is that early reclassification for English learners matters. We find that students reclassified in high school are 41 percentage points less likely to enroll in a four-year college than students who were never classified as ELs or never ELs. And they're 10 percentage points less likely to graduate from college. And what do we mean by reclassification? So reclassification is the point in time where students are deemed as English proficient and they exit EL services in their schools. So most of this gap between those students that are not classified as ELs and students who are classified as ELs is explained by sociodemographic factors. So things like race, economic status, gender, but academics also explains a good portion of that gap. So we wanted to focus on college level courses since there's evidence that college level courses like AP, advanced placement, IB, and dual credit courses serve as predictors of college enrollment and completion. And they're also what schools can focus on to help more English learners enroll in college and complete college as well. So I'm going to share some slides here with the findings. And let's see if I can do that quickly. Okay, and please, wow, okay. And please let me know by audio whether if you can't see the slides or if the notes page is showing. So this figure that we're looking at here indicates the number of college level courses, again, AP, IB, or dual credit courses taken by EL status. So those that were never classified on the far left as ELs are reclassified in elementary school, middle school, and in high school.
Esmeralda, I don't know if you can hit slideshow because we can see your, I think the next slide.
Okay, let me.
It's kind of but if no problem if you have difficulty.
Okay. Let me try to stop share. Okay, I think I'm just going to keep it.
Yeah, we can deal with it this way. Just wanted you to know that. Oh, there you go. Sounds good.
Okay,
Looks good.
wonderful. Okay. Uh, so what we see is that so EL reclassification matters. So EL students reclassified in elementary school grades are more likely to take college level courses in high school than those that are reclassified later. So students who remain EL through middle and high school take fewer college level courses than their reclassified peers or those that were never classified as English learners. And this has consequences for college enrollment and completion. So this figure, the full bars, represent the portion of the academic gap between English learners and those that were never classified as English learners. So by academics, we're thinking about math score, reading test scores, and grades. And what we see is that a large portion of this academic gap between those that were never classified as ELs and those that reclassified at different levels in schooling is largely explained by these college level courses. So differences in college level course taking between ELs and never ELs explains about 8 to 23% of the academic gap of enrolling in a 4-year college. And it also represents a substantial portion of the academic gap of completing a college degree, as you can see here. And if you look at this bar right here for the reclassified in elementary school, students who enroll in a 4-year college that were reclassified in elementary school actually take more college level courses, and they actually have an advantage in college completion than those who were never classified as English learners. So this actually turns to an advantage if they are reclassified earlier. So what are some practical implications for integration of immigrant students? First, that academic tracking for EL students limits opportunity. EL status can serve to help students, but it can unintentionally limit access to college level courses. So timely reclassification is an important component, and we need to ensure that EL students are held in language support systems, that they're not held in English support systems longer than is necessary. So here's some practice recommendations, and these practice recommendations were developed alongside our district partner, HISD. So they had a say in what could be done to help more English learners enroll and graduate from college. And the first thing that they do, one thing that you can take from this presentation is to say, oh, we need to reclassify all students really early. Well, they cautioned against that because reclassifying students too early could cause more harm than good. So if students don't have the supports that they need, they could struggle, become frustrated, and drop out of high school. But there are other ways that we can broaden access to college level courses for these students. And I'm going to mention 3 of them. And the first is to encourage students to take college level courses that are not language dependent. So these can include math, studio art, or for native speakers, Spanish. We can also integrate teacher recommendations into the course recommendation processes. So in HISD, it was largely dependent on grades, and this can serve kind of as a tracking mechanism as well. So one of their recommendations was to broaden that and to make a holistic approach as well, thinking about students' aspirations. The third is to embed language instruction into academic content broadly. So practices like sheltered instruction or classroom level in diagnostics would help. States also have a role to play and can promote greater equity in EL reclassification. So following the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, some states simplified reclassification criteria to requiring fewer tests. And one example of a state that did this, Michigan, actually changed from a manual district level reclassification process to a default or automatic reclassification process at the state level. So if students scored a certain benchmark on a test, they were automatically reclassified. And this increased reclassification rates by 35 percentage point, especially for Spanish speakers that are more likely disadvantaged in this area. So another means for that could really create equity and in skilling our immigrant students in college and career completion is these research practice partnerships between universities and districts that can be funded and supported by the state and even by the private sector as well, to really connect research to practice in helping our English learner students. So I think if we all work together, we can really help close these gaps between English learners and those who have not been classified as English learners. So thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, everybody. This has been really thought-provoking studies and programs that you all have. I want to open it up to questions from the audience, from everybody. And we are a small group enough. You can either unmute and speak with the speakers, or if you're more comfortable putting your question in the chat, please do so. I will direct my first question to Professor Koslowski. So the refugee resettlement system, in my opinion, has a really fatal flaw. It's that really time-bound a period of support, and after which the refugee is expected to be self-sufficient. So inadvertently, what happens is that refugee resettlement staff are really under pressure to have the refugee self-sufficient and push them into survival jobs. So the system that is meant to help them is really setting them up for the kind of underskilling or de-skilling that you have talked about. Do you have any recommendations, again, to rectify the system? And again, you know, it's really the understanding, the programs that understand that refugees need support to offset the time they'll take outside of work in order to get more skilling, more credentials, or validate their credentials, or get become English proficient. So many of the programs do not allow that, and they're really pressure for them to just economically become sufficient. Wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. It's central to this issue here. Sure. I mean, instead of 90 days, 180 days, maybe a bit longer, right? That would help. But we've gone in the other direction in this country. And so, quite frankly, I don't see it politically sustainable to push that envelope much longer. What might might help a bit is to try to get refugees who have professional experience to identify them as early as possible, and then have a package ready for them. One, credential assessment. Now, I know that Upwardly Global, for example, will do that at a certain point, et cetera. But I think these different assessments, they might cost $350, $400 or so. Well, that would be a well-spent $350 or $400 for every individual who enters, for example, the Professional Pathways program right off the bat. And then try to place those, think hard about, if you have the information, is even if it's a low-skilled job, even if it's, low paid, in the environment. So for even a physician, right, in a hospital, so that the person could hear the terminology being used.
Yeah.
I was helping an orthopedic surgeon from Syria, and he got a job setting casts. I mean, setting bones, right? And, very much lower than what he would normally do. But it provided them opportunities and context, of course, right? So those are two things that could be done. And then the big problem, I know in the capital region, I've heard that access, in terms of English uh, classes is that, the wait time has been a couple months long, right? I
Yeah.
mean, maybe it's getting a little better now, but last year it was awful. And so, yeah, everybody's already got into jobs. So there may be other alternatives. And that's why I suggest SUNY and CUNY,
Yeah.
because partly our capacity is probably going to be underutilized a lot more this coming year because we're going to have fewer foreign students who we normally serve. We're coming in, doing the summer for conditional admits, et cetera. Here we have capacity. Let's find a little money to utilize it.
Great point. Great point. All right. Any questions? A question to Joanna and Margaret about your work with businesses. Oftentimes, people in this work cite the need to train employers, train the native-born employers to raise awareness about, hiring based on merit and not hiring based on other, cultural factors. For example, they refer to what they know and what they say, that oftentimes immigrants or foreign-born workers show up differently to the job. And they may not have the same soft skills that native-born have. And so there is a need to train employers about how immigrant workers may show up and how to be able to not judge them based on the lack of soft skills. So is your program providing any resources about that or addressing these issues at all?
Yeah, and so when we've done, as I mentioned, our business engagement work group where we're going to our workforce boards, that's one of the things that we talk about, like some of the best practice when it comes to hiring this population. A big thing would be, unconscious bias and cultural awareness training for all employees, not, specifically your hiring staff. Those who are going to be, engaging with this population first and foremost throughout the application and interview and onboarding process, but also just your employees as well, right? Your workforce, right? And it's not just our internationally born folks. I mean, you can have folks who grew up in the same neighborhood, but they just have different family dynamics, different family values. They may have been exposed to different things, right? And so it's always going to be helpful for us to increase our cultural awareness and our unconscious bias when we come to working with folks. A big thing that I always ask when we have these questions, as well as when you mentioned kind of hiring on merit, hiring on skills based, not necessarily just where you went to school, but like what skills are you bringing to the table? What have you done? What skills do you have that are going to be valuable for us? And so I've posed to them, like, why do we question international education? Right? Why do you think it is less than education that someone may obtain in the United States? Like, why are we thinking that? Why is that our go-to? Right? And it's culturally just been enshrined in us that things outside are maybe not as good as the things inside. And so how do we change that shift? Right. And then we mentioned, you talked about credential evaluation, Dr. Koslowski talked about credential evaluations, right? Letting them know, hey, if you are still skeptical, have someone to complete a credential evaluation. At the same time, reinforcing to them that that's another barrier that you're placing on this applicant, right? To have to submit a credential evaluation because of the time, the process, the payment, the funds that are needed for it. So it's really trying to get folks out of their own way sometimes. And I do say this often. I feel like employers a lot of times are looking for the unicorns and they don't exist. Right. We need to find the folks who are actually going to be physically able to show up, have the dedication and the motivation to be there and work with them to kind of quote unquote, bring them into that workforce and show them what is needed of them in order to be successful in that company. Margaret, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you hit it really well. I mean, the biggest thing is just getting the training into the hands of the people who run the businesses. And the workforce boards are usually a pretty good way to they're a pretty good in. I'll also just, kind of add from the adult education side, there's a lot of partnerships that happen between adult education programs and employers as well. And, you know, a lot of it is just kind of once an employer has had successful experiences hiring someone from a particular group, then they're more likely to repeat that, right? So, you know, kind of having that repeated interaction, and once we can start getting a few folks in the door, it tends to get easier.
The other thing too, just to add to that, would be also like finding the employer champions that are engaged in with our internationally trained professionals. They're doing it well, and have them to be the advocates, because us talking about it, what do we know about running a business, right? But if you have your employer partners that are championing this work, how do you bring them along to advocate for and speak to their other employer partners and saying, hey, we've had a lot of success in this, and this is how we've done it, and this is possibly how you could replicate the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful, your task force structure, the advisory board, and the work groups. I noticed they're all volunteers. Sometimes what we experience in our work is that it's very easy to establish these bodies, and their work fantastic. They're phenomenal at the beginning, but very, very hard to sustain. You really need to put a lot of effort and a lot of sweat and and blood in them. So any suggestions or recommendations on how can people sustain these advisory boards and continue to provide the incentives for employers, for others to join in and continue championing these efforts?
Yeah, I mean, one caveat obviously with our task force is that outside, you know, all of our members are volunteers, but like myself and my co-lead who actually lead the task force, we are being paid to do this work, right? So that kind of quote unquote makes it easier to sustain, because you have people who are being paid to continue to lead, to continue to host the meetings, to continue to bring the work groups together, to continue to have the conversations, et cetera, right? And so I think that's one big thing that I have seen with our task force is that, yes, we do have 2 paid folks who are leading these efforts while everyone else is a volunteer member. Alongside that, though, is I get referrals for folks to join the task force all the time. Right. And so I'll have, you know, a member who's a member and like, hey, I was talking to this person and I told them like about the task force. And so I feel like people also find a lot of value in it. And we've been able to kind of bring information that makes sense, I guess, in trying to really think about what can be helpful to our task force members when it comes to working with our internationally trained professionals, and really trying to set that stage for like, we are here as a support for you, you know, to be 100% honest, we have about 180-ish members. Any given call, we have anywhere from 30 to 40 people, right? And again, it just depends on who's available, what else they all have going on, because, you know, we're all working and doing everything else under the sun. And so just being mindful of that. And I think we also, because we are so laid back, we have no requirements of any of our members. We really just want them to come and participate as they're able to, and their interests align and their capacity to be able to engage. And so I think kind of that mix of, yes, we do have some paid staff to really lead it. And also we're bringing valuable information. We're taking input from our task force. Everything we do is basically comes from our task force members. Like, what do you want to hear about? What do you want to see? What makes sense for you, as well? So kind of helping to build that in. And then also the mix, we do virtual and in person. So kind of building in some of that in-person touch points for folks to be more connected versus just the Hollywood squares on the screen, which yes, is great for accessibility and more folks to be able to join in. And at the same time, you don't get that personal one-on-one time as well. So, Margaret, anything you would want to add to that too?
I would just add, you know, we are all volunteers, but looking at it from a very utilitarian standpoint, if time is money, this makes my job a lot easier. So, you know, when a student comes and they have like we're going to keep going back to the health thing because that's just present in my mind. When a student comes in, I don't have to have myself or one of my team members dedicate an hour to researching the different options that are available in our area and where we can send this student. It's already done, right? The task force makes our jobs easier, which I think is another reason that a lot of folks continue to come. I mean, this task force has been around for longer than I have. I mean, it's pretty well sustained. And I think that's a big reason is that, you know, work smarter, not harder. And this helps us work smarter.
Yeah, so just to pin, we're going into our 10th year here in July. So yeah, it's taken it. We've had a few different people kind of operating and running the task force. I'm not original to the task force. I've been in the role for about 3 years. So over the time, we've had about two, three other different, about two that were there kind of for longer stints.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So Professor Ray Koslowski, Joanna Wenningham, Margaret Shrager, Esmeralda Sanchez Salazar, thank you so very much. Please continue to do the excellent work you're doing. You're making our communities better, and the research is wonderful. It contributes to our understanding of what is going on and helps us design better programming and create opportunity structures that really help people. So I think we're transitioning back to the main room where we'll have a short 5-minute break. Then we will transition to the second concurrent workshops. Thank you, everybody.